Okay, so are you ready to kind of like dive into some really heavy stuff today?
Always up for a challenge. Hit me with it.
We're going to be talking about World War III.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. The possibility that it's like already happening,
Mm.
but not in the way you might think.
Hmm.
We're not talking like trenches and massive tank battles.
Right.
It's something a lot more subtle and frankly a lot scarier.
Okay.
And we're basing this deep dive on an analysis called "Are We in World War III? The Silent Global Conflict Unfolding."
Yeah, it's a question that's definitely on a lot of people's minds,
Sure.
especially with everything going on in the world.
Yeah, it really it feels like
Yeah.
things are escalating.
Yeah.
This analysis breaks it down into 5 major fronts of conflict.
5.
5.
Wow.
Yeah.
It sounds almost too overwhelming to be true.
Right.
Yeah.
So like let's unpack each one
Okay.
and see if this whole World War III idea like actually holds water.
Yeah, I think what's important to remember is that warfare itself has evolved.
Okay.
We're not just talking about traditional military confrontations anymore.
Okay.
It's much more about economic leverage, cyber attacks, and controlling the narrative.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Mhm.
So let's start with front number 1. The U.S. and China. It's being called Cold War 2.0,
Mhm.
but with even higher stakes.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, what makes this rivalry so significant is the sheer scale of both countries. We're talking about the world's 2 largest economies.
Yeah.
And with China's GDP predicted to surpass the U.S. in the next decade.
Wow. I knew China's economy was like growing,
Yeah.
but I didn't realize it was that close to overtaking the U.S.
Oh, yeah, it's happening. And
Yeah.
and it's a major power shift, and it's playing out on several fronts.
Okay.
First, there's the economic warfare.
Okay.
Think trade wars, sanctions on companies like Huawei and TikTok, and a fierce competition over control of critical technologies like semiconductors
Right.
and artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Whoever wins this race will have a huge advantage in the 21st century.
So it's almost like a technological arms race.
Yeah.
But instead of like stockpiling weapons, they're stockpiling patents and microchips.
Exactly. And then there's the military posturing,
Oh, right.
especially in the South China Sea and around Taiwan.
Right.
China is rapidly expanding its military capabilities,
Okay.
building new warships, developing hypersonic missiles, and conducting increasingly aggressive military exercises.
Wow.
Their military spending has increased by over 70% in the last decade alone.
So, I mean, that's a pretty clear sign that like they're serious about projecting their power.
Oh, yeah.
What's the U.S. response to all this?
Well, the U.S. is also strengthening its military presence in the region,
Right.
forming new alliances and investing heavily in advanced technologies like autonomous weapon systems.
Right.
It's a delicate balancing act,
Yeah.
trying to deter Chinese aggression without provoking a direct conflict. The real flashpoint here is Taiwan.
Oh, okay.
China sees it as a breakaway province that must be reunified by force if necessary.
And the U.S. has pledged to support Taiwan, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, isn't that like a recipe for disaster?
And it's definitely a potential trigger for a major conflict.
Right.
The U.S. has maintained a policy of strategic ambiguity when it comes to Taiwan,
Okay.
meaning they haven't explicitly said they would intervene militarily if China were to invade,
Right.
but they've also provided Taiwan with billions of dollars in military aid
Okay.
and conducted naval exercises in the Taiwan Strait, sending a message of deterrence to Beijing.
It seems like a very like tense
Yeah.
and delicate situation. Is there any like realistic chance of a peaceful resolution?
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
There are those who believe that China's economic and military rise is inevitable
Okay.
and that the U.S. should accept a diminished role in the region.
Right.
Others argue that the U.S. must stand firm and push back against Chinese aggression, even if it means risking conflict.
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
Okay, let's move on to front number 2,
Okay.
which is arguably even more concerning right now.
Okay.
Russia versus NATO, with the war in Ukraine at the center of it all.
Yeah, this is a conflict that has already turned hot with real-world consequences that are being felt globally.
Yeah.
And it's also a conflict that has highlighted the fault lines in the international order and the potential for a wider war.
Yeah, I think a lot of people initially saw the war in Ukraine as like a regional conflict,
Right.
but it's pretty clear now that it has much wider implications.
Yeah.
So how does this fit into the World War III framework?
Well, first, it's important to understand that this war is essentially a proxy conflict between Russia and the West.
Okay.
Russia sees NATO expansion as a direct threat to its security
Right.
and is determined to prevent Ukraine from joining the alliance.
And the West sees Russia's invasion as, like, a violation of international law
Yeah.
and a challenge to the post-Cold War order.
Exactly. So you have these two opposing visions of the world colliding.
Yeah.
And the result is a very dangerous situation.
Okay, so how does this escalate into something bigger, something more global?
Well, one way is through miscalculation or escalation.
Okay.
For example, if Russia were to accidentally or intentionally attack a NATO member,
Yeah,
that would trigger Article 5 of the NATO treaty,
right.
which requires all members to come to the defense of the attacked country.
So basically, like, one stray missile
Yeah.
could set off a chain reaction
Right.
that leads to, like, a full-blown war between Russia and NATO.
It's a very real possibility.
Wow.
And then there's the nuclear dimension.
Oh, right.
Russia has the largest nuclear arsenal in the world,
Right.
and Putin has repeatedly hinted at the possibility of using nuclear weapons if Russia's security is threatened.
That's terrifying. What about the economic consequences of this conflict? I mean, we've already seen the impact, like, on energy prices
Oh, yeah.
and global supply chains.
The economic fallout from the war is significant and will continue to be felt for years to come.
Right.
The West has imposed unprecedented sanctions on Russia,
Okay.
targeting its financial system, energy sector, and key industries.
Right.
And this is having a major impact on the Russian economy.
Yeah.
But it's also causing pain for countries around the world
Right.
that depend on Russian energy and other exports.
It seems like these sanctions are almost like a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
They're hurting Russia,
Yeah.
but they're also creating, like, economic instability globally.
It's a difficult balancing act.
Yeah.
The West is trying to punish Russia for its aggression
Right.
without causing too much damage to the global economy.
Right.
But it's a risky strategy, and it's not clear how it will play out in the long run.
So we've got the potential for military escalation,
Right.
the nuclear threat, and a global economic crisis, all stemming from the conflict in Ukraine. It's hard to see any, like, easy way out of this.
It's definitely a very challenging situation, but it's important to remember that diplomacy is still an option,
Oh, yeah?
even in the midst of conflict.
Right.
There are ongoing efforts to find a negotiated settlement to the war,
Okay.
and it's possible that a breakthrough could be achieved.
Let's hope so.
Really?
All right, moving on to front number 3.
Okay.
We're heading to a region that's unfortunately no stranger to conflict, the Middle East.
Right, and it's not just one conflict we're talking about here. It's a complex web of rivalries, alliances, and ideological battles that have been simmering for decades.
Right.
So
So it's more like a powder keg
yeah,
than like a single flashpoint.
exactly. There are multiple points of friction that could ignite a larger conflict. You have the Israeli-Palestinian conflict,
Right.
the rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran,
Quite.
the ongoing war in Yemen,
Yep.
and of course the issue of Iran's nuclear program.
Right.
And all of these conflicts are interconnected,
Right.
making the situation even more volatile.
So let's break it down a little. First, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It seems like that's been going on forever.
It has been.
Is there any chance of, like, a lasting peace agreement?
Well, the two-state solution,
Right.
which would create an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel,
Okay.
has been the long-standing goal of the international community.
Yeah.
But the prospects for negotiated settlement seem increasingly remote.
Okay.
The Israeli-Palestinian peace process has been stalled for years,
Right.
and there's a growing sense of pessimism on both sides.
What about the rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran? That seems like a major fall line in the region.
This rivalry is rooted in a number of factors,
Yeah.
including religious differences, geopolitical competition, and ideological struggles.
Right.
Saudi Arabia is a Sunni Muslim monarchy,
Okay.
while Iran is a Shiite Muslim theocracy.
Right. They are competing for influence in the region,
Yeah.
and they are backing opposing sides in conflicts, like the war in Yemen.
Speaking of Yemen, how does that conflict fit into this bigger picture?
The war in Yemen is a humanitarian catastrophe,
Right.
and it's also a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Okay.
Saudi Arabia is leading a coalition of Arab states that is fighting against the Houthi rebels, who are backed by Iran.
So it's like a microcosm
Yeah.
of of the larger regional conflict.
Exactly. And it's a very dangerous situation because it has the potential to escalate and draw in other countries.
Right.
The U.S. is providing support to the Saudi-led coalition, while Iran is supplying the Houthis with weapons and training.
And then there's the issue of Iran's nuclear program, which, seems to be a major source of tension with the West.
It is.
Right.
The U.S. and its allies are concerned that Iran is developing nuclear weapons.
Okay.
And they have imposed sanctions on Iran in an effort to curb its nuclear ambitions.
Right. Iran insists that its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes.
Okay.
But there is widespread skepticism about this claim.
So we've got, like, all these different conflicts and tensions, simmering in the Middle East. Is there any reason to believe that things could actually improve?
It's a very difficult question.
Yeah.
There are some hopeful signs, such as the recent normalization of relations between Israel and some Arab states.
Okay.
But there are also many challenges, including deep-seated mistrust, political instability, and the ongoing threat of terrorism.
It sounds like a region that is perpetually, like, on edge.
It is.
Right.
And it's a region that has the potential to spark a much wider conflict.
Right.
Any one of these conflicts could escalate and draw in other countries, including the U.S. and Russia.
Okay, so we've covered the first three fronts of this potential World War III.
Right.
In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore the remaining two fronts, the economic battlefield and the new battlefields of cyber warfare, AI, and information.
Right. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
It's going to get even more fascinating.
Oh, yeah?
And perhaps a little bit unsettling as we delve into those areas.
Can't wait.
So we've laid out these first three. What?
Yeah.
But now let's kind of zoom in on some specific flashpoints. Those places where things could, like, really boil over and trigger a wider war.
You mean those, like, hold on, is this how it all starts?
Yeah.
Kind of scenarios?
Precisely, yeah.
Okay.
The situations where seemingly isolated events could cascade into something much larger and far more dangerous.
I'm all ears, but honestly, I'm already a little on edge after our last conversation.
Well, let's start with Taiwan.
Okay.
As we discussed, it's perhaps the most volatile situation in the world right now.
Right.
China's claim over Taiwan isn't just rhetoric.
Right.
They're actively preparing for what they call reunification, even if it means using force.
Right.
Their military buildup in the region is staggering.
And what about the U.S. response? Are they willing to, like, go toe-to-toe with China over Taiwan?
Well, the U.S. has walked a tightrope with its strategic ambiguity policy regarding Taiwan.
Right.
They haven't definitively said they would defend Taiwan militarily.
Right.
But their actions suggest they're not simply going to stand aside if China invades.
So it's this high-stakes poker game.
Yeah.
But the chips are warships.
Right.
And the pot is, like, potentially a global war.
Yeah. The stakes are astronomical.
Yeah.
A Chinese invasion of Taiwan would be a major test of U.S. credibility and resolve on the world stage. It could easily draw the two superpowers into a direct conflict.
Right.
And let's not forget, both countries possess nuclear weapons.
The potential consequences are just, like, unthinkable.
Yeah.
So Taiwan is definitely a situation to watch closely.
Definitely.
What about Ukraine? Is there a chance that conflict could spill over into neighboring countries?
There are definitely scenarios that keep experts up at night.
Okay.
One is the possibility of Russia, intentionally or not, expanding the conflict into a neighboring NATO country.
Right.
Imagine even a stray missile landing in NATO territory.
Right.
That could trigger Article 5 of the NATO treaty.
Which means all NATO members would be obligated to respond militarily.
Exactly.
That's a fast track to World War III, isn't it?
It would be a monumental escalation.
Wow.
Another worry is the potential for Russia to use tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine.
I'd rather not even think about that scenario.
I understand, but these are the realities we have to consider.
Right.
And then, of course, there's always the risk of miscalculation.
Yeah.
In a conflict as tense as this,
right,
even a small misunderstanding could spiral out of control.
It's like everything's tiptoeing through a minefield, hoping they don't make that one, fatal step.
Yeah.
Okay, enough about Europe.
Okay.
What about the Middle East?
Right.
We talked earlier about the Israel-Iran situation.
Mm-hmm.
How How likely is that to become like a global flashpoint?
Well, the Middle East is a region
Yeah.
with so many layers of conflict.
Right.
You have the Israeli-Palestinian conflict,
Yeah.
the rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran,
Right.
the ongoing war in Yemen,
Yep.
and then the ever-present issue of Iran's nuclear program.
Right.
Any one of these could be the spark that ignites a larger fire.
So it's not just about one potential flashpoint.
Right.
It's about the potential for any of these conflicts
Yeah.
to set off like a chain reaction.
Exactly. For instance, if Israel were to become convinced that Iran is on the verge of developing a nuclear weapon,
Right.
they might feel compelled to launch a preemptive strike.
And that would almost certainly trigger like a massive retaliation from Iran, wouldn't it?
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
And given Iran's alliances with groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza,
Yep.
the conflict could spread throughout the region incredibly quickly.
Wow.
Potentially drawing in global powers like the U.S. and Russia.
So the idea that the Middle East could be the catalyst for a global conflict isn't just like a far-fetched theory.
No.
It's a very real and present danger.
Absolutely. We also can't discount the potential for unintended consequences.
Right.
A miscalculation,
Yeah.
a false alarm,
Yeah.
a simple misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Any of these could set off a chain of events with devastating consequences.
It seems like every one of these flashpoints is like teetering on the brink of catastrophe. Is there anything that can be done to like pull us back from the edge?
It's a daunting challenge, but it's not insurmountable.
No.
Diplomacy is always the preferred option. It requires patience, skill, and a willingness to compromise.
Right.
All of which seem to be in short supply these days.
Unfortunately, yeah, that seems to be the case.
Right.
But giving up on diplomacy is not an option.
Right.
We need to keep the lines of communication open, even with those we disagree with.
Right.
Even when it seems impossible.
We can't give up on finding common ground.
Right.
But at the same time, we also need to be prepared for the possibility of conflict.
So we have to be both doves and hawks at the same time.
Yeah, it's a delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
We need to be strong enough to deter aggression,
Right.
but also wise enough to avoid unnecessary provocations.
Sounds like we need a healthy dose of luck, too.
A bit of luck wouldn't hurt.
Yeah.
But ultimately, our fate is in our hands. The choices we make today, individually and collectively, will determine the world we live in tomorrow.
That's a sobering thought. Okay, so far we've covered the first three fronts of this potential World War III.
Right.
And explored some of the most volatile flashpoints around the globe.
But our deep dive isn't over yet.
Okay.
Next, we'll shift gears.
Okay.
And explore those fronts that might not involve tanks and missiles,
Right.
but are arguably just as crucial in this new era of global conflict.
Right.
The economic battlefield and the new battlefields of cyber warfare, AI, and information.
Okay, so we've spent like the last two parts of this deep dive exploring like some really intense stuff.
Yeah.
You know, potential flashpoints, military buildups, the threat of nuclear war.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's enough to make anyone want to bury their head in the sand.
I can understand that.
Right.
But before we kind of wrap things up,
Okay.
I think it's crucial to understand the underlying trends that are
Yes.
driving these conflicts. You know, it's not just about isolated events.
Right.
It's about fundamental shifts in the global landscape.
Okay, so let's take a step back from like the brink for a moment
Yeah.
and try to make sense of the bigger picture. Like what are the forces that are shaping this new era of global conflict?
Well, one key factor is the changing balance of power.
Okay.
For decades, the U.S. was the dominant global superpower.
Right.
But now China is rapidly rising both economically and militarily, and that's creating a lot of friction.
It's like the old guard being challenged by a new contender,
Yeah.
but on a global scale.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this power shift is playing out in multiple arenas.
Okay.
We're seeing it in the economic competition,
Right.
the race for technological dominance, and even in the battle for influence in international institutions.
It's not just about who has the like biggest military anymore.
Not at all.
Right.
Power in the 21st century is much more multifaceted.
Okay.
It's about economic strength,
Right.
technological innovation, And the ability to shape the narrative. China understands this, and they've been very strategic in their approach.
Can you give me an example of what you mean?
Sure. Look at China's Belt and Road Initiative.
Okay.
It's a massive infrastructure project
Okay.
that spans continents, connecting China to Europe,
Wow.
Africa,
Yeah.
and the Middle East.
Right.
On the surface.
Yeah.
It's about building roads, railways, and ports.
Okay.
But it's also about expanding China's economic and political influence around the world.
So it's not just about building infrastructure.
Right.
It's about building a network of like alliances and dependencies.
Precisely. China is using its economic power
Right.
to forge new relationships and
Yeah.
reshape the global order in ways that benefit its interests.
Right.
And that's something that the U.S. and its allies are struggling to adapt to.
Okay, so we have this shifting balance of power. What else is contributing to the sense of global instability?
Another factor is the rise of nationalism and populism.
Okay.
We're seeing it in countries all over the world.
Yeah.
A rejection of globalism,
Right.
a suspicion of international institutions,
Right.
and a retreat into more inward-looking nationalistic agendas.
Like everyone's circling the wagons
Yeah.
and looking at everyone else with suspicion.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
And this trend is making it much more difficult
Yeah.
to find common ground, to cooperate on global challenges,
Right.
and to build trust between nations.
Right.
It's also creating opportunities
Yeah.
for authoritarian leaders to exploit fear and division
Okay.
through their own political gain.
So we have this like perfect storm brewing, right? A shifting balance of power.
Yeah.
The rise of nationalism, new forms of conflict,
Yeah.
and a whole lot of uncertainty about the future. It's pretty overwhelming.
It's definitely a challenging time.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say it's hopeless.
Okay.
There are things we can do, both individually and collectively, to navigate this complex landscape and create a more peaceful and stable world.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
Give me some reasons for optimism. Like what can we do to turn things around?
Well, first we need to start by understanding the forces at play.
Okay.
We need to be aware of the biases and assumptions that shape our thinking.
Right.
And we need to be critical consumers of information, especially in the age of social media.
So basically we need to like up our critical thinking game.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to be able to distinguish between fact and fiction,
Right.
truth and propaganda. We need to be able to see through the noise
Yeah.
and make informed decisions
Right.
based on evidence, not emotion.
That's easier said than done though, right?
It is.
With all the like information overload and the constant barrage of opinions and agendas being pushed online.
It's definitely a challenge, but it's essential.
Yeah.
We can't afford to be passive consumers of information.
Right.
We need to be active, engaged,
Yeah.
and critical thinkers.
Right.
And that means being willing to challenge our own beliefs,
Yeah.
to seek out diverse perspectives,
Okay.
and to be open to changing our minds when presented with new evidence.
So critical thinking is key.
Yeah.
What else can we do?
Another important step is to engage in constructive dialogue, even with those we disagree with.
Okay.
We need to find ways to bridge the divides that are separating us.
Right.
To build empathy and understanding.
Yeah.
And to search for common ground.
That sounds pretty idealistic.
It does.
Especially in the current climate. It seems like everyone's just like shouting at each other from their own ideological silos.
I understand your skepticism.
Yeah.
But I truly believe that dialogue is essential.
Okay.
It's not about agreeing with everything the other person says.
Right.
It's about listening, trying to understand their perspective.
Right.
And finding areas where we can work together.
So it's about building bridges instead of walls.
Exactly. And it's not easy.
Right.
It takes effort, patience, and a willingness to step outside of our comfort zones.
Okay.
But it's the only way we're going to find solutions to the complex challenges we face as a global community.
I appreciate your optimism.
Well,
it's easy to get caught up in the doom and gloom.
It is.
But it's important to remember that we have agency.
We do.
That we can make choices that shape the future.
Absolutely. We're not just passive bystanders in this unfolding drama.
Right.
We're active participants.
Yeah.
And the choices we make, both individually and collectively, will determine the course of history.
Well, that's a powerful thought to end on. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive. It's been a sobering, but ultimately, I think, a hopeful conversation.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay hopeful. The future is not predetermined. We have the power to create the world we want to live in.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time.